Welcome in once again to another edition of Interrupting Racism. I'm Brian Prawitz, your host, and today we are excited to introduce one of the people that I've gotten to know as my own journey through what is happening in our United States continues to develop. Through a mutual friend, I was able to meet and get to know a gentleman by the name of Terrill. And Al is in Columbia, Missouri. And this is the first time we've seen each other because we've been talking on the phone and Facebook messaging back and forth and communicating that way. So, Al, it's nice to finally see you for the first time, my friend.
Well, same here, Brian. Same here, man. I really appreciate you having me on your podcast. Okay.
Well, when I started thinking about doing this, I immediately thought about sharing the conversations that I've been having with people, either people that I've known for a long time or people that I've met through this process. I want to share the conversations that I've been having and turn them into interviews essentially, because I think there's some value in what's happening if I'm sharing my experience with other people, especially people in my network who look like me, who occupy kind of a leadership position, or we are at the top of the privilege spectrum, if you will. And I think it's really important that we talk about all these things. So anyway, before I continue to ramble on, give us about a 60-second biography. How would you introduce yourself, Al?
I introduce myself as a proud Black man, a father of two great sons, God-fearing man, a civil rights activist, and somebody who's lived his life trying to make this world a little bit better for not just some, but for all, or at least for the majority. I'd sum it up that way, Brian.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned this because are you a pastor in Columbia, Missouri? What's your role?
No. I used to be the assistant to my pastor. He moved back home to South Carolina. So some things changed within my church. I was the head of our trustee board. I was head of everything you could just imagine. But with the COVID-19, I think what I've done is have to step away from the church just a little bit more, like everybody else, I would assume. At least I hope they are, just to stay safe. Sure. But I get that question asked a lot when I'm walking around Columbia, Missouri, because if a Black man in Columbia is in a suit, it is presumed that you must be a minister or a pastor of a church here. And I've had ladies walk up and say, "Sir, are you a pastor?" I said, "No, but thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it."
Well, I mean, in many ways, I guess many of us do lead a congregation, if you will, spreading messages of all different kinds, including messages of faith as well. So, and I know you mentioned as you introduced yourself as a man of faith, and I know that plays a huge role in the things that you do in Columbia, Missouri, and other places as well. And, our mutual friend, Tina Arredondo, introduced us and said, first of all, told me that I needed to meet you, needed to talk to you, needed to hear from you, because as I'm trying to expand my circle of friends, diversifying my friends, as my shirt says, it's very important for me to hear the stories of people of color from throughout the country. And I've been doing this for about 5 minutes. I mean, obviously, I'm a product of the outpouring that has happened since George Floyd. You've been doing this your entire life, essentially, right? So talk about the role that you've had and what has brought you to this point.
Well, I can start back even as far as I remember my school closed. I came from a rural community. And when the school closed during my seventh grade, we were sent to we had two options. We could go to a town called Glasgow High School, or we could go to a town called Fayette High School to attend or finish middle school and go on to high school. So I basically followed my older siblings since I was the youngest of my siblings. So I didn't have much to say in all this, but I ended up going to Fayette middle school, then to the high school. And one of the first things I learned was that was probably the first time I truly ran into bigotry and racism is when I went to that Fayette middle school and even the high school level. A lot of things happened that changed my outlook on people, but at the same time, it didn't change who I was. It didn't change who my parents raised me to be, and that was accept people for who they are, judging by the character and nothing more. I told you once before, Brian, how I have a lot of friends from all walks of life on this earth. I never selected a friend based on one's pigmentation. It had nothing to do with it. Either you're good people or you're bad people, as far as I'm concerned. If you treat me with respect, I'm going to do the same. I think one of the things I'm going to make sure I say in our conversation today, and you and I've touched on some of this in the past conversations. If anybody's listening out there, I'm one who's promoting dialogue. I am somebody who's saying to anybody and everybody that we must be able to sit down and talk about matters. Whether you agree or disagree with me or Brian or whomever else, I just ask you to do it respectfully. And no matter what, we can have that conversation, because we need to have these conversations. I remember mentioning to you about being on the Human Rights Commission for here, the city of Columbia, Missouri. And we were having a meeting one night, and that was probably one of my first or second meetings there. And they were going around the table and they were talking about a topic, but I couldn't quite understand what they were saying. And I just finally asked everybody, I said, are you trying to talk about race? And I was shocked that nobody felt comfortable enough to say the word race. And this is a human rights group who's supposed to be addressing race issues. So it wasn't for me. Let's just say I only stayed a year and then I exited, basically. It wasn't something that I felt comfortable being a part of.
And you've also said to me too that it's important that we're having these conversations, but it's also important that we elevate it above black versus white.
Very much so.
The conversation needs to turn to right versus wrong.
I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, this is becoming more about a moral issue. I've looked at the two great men who just left this world recently, Representative John Lewis and Reverend Vivian, and I thought about this, Brian. I said, these gentlemen, and they deserve every accolade we can possibly give them. We've got to carry on the torch that they carried so well. But the sadness in all this for me is not just the passing of their deaths, but also the fact that they spent their entire lives fighting for the same things we're fighting for today. Equality, justice for anybody and everybody. And that part saddens me, because they saw bits and pieces of it, but we have a long way to go. We haven't even got to the tip of the iceberg yet, not even close, with everything that you see happening in this country today or even around the world today.
Man, you know what happens to me is I think of about 5 different directions that we could take the conversation from there, you know.
Take it any direction you want to take it. I'll go with you.
It's you've talked about how important it is that we have the conversations and elevate the conversation, and now I know you have a particular opinion about Donald Trump, and it is a strong opinion for sure. And I live in a place where he still has a tremendous amount of support.
I live in a place where he has some tremendous amount of support. Missouri is one of his states, so-called.
Well, okay. The other day, there was an interview where the CBS exclusive interview, and I can't remember the lady that was interviewing the president, but she asked him, why are black people still being killed in the street? He said, that is a very unfortunate question. More white people are being killed in the street by police than black people. And my thought was, either way, that's bad. Like, maybe we could work on the number of people killed in the street by police. Let's take it that. And I thought of you, and I thought the difference in the conversation between what's happening to black people and maybe the good conversation would be what's happening to all people. And I think that might be a good example of where maybe the conversations need to go in some of these issues.
Well, it'd be great if we can have that conversation. But I think before we can have that conversation, first of all, blacks are 2 to 3 times more likely to be killed by the police than a white person in this country. Let's make that a fact. That's clear.
Clarifying that, because yes, you're absolutely right. No.
And as far as the man in the White House, since it's your podcast, I'm going to be very careful not to show my disdain and dislike for the man who sits in the White House. I think a friend of mine and I were talking recently, and I never thought in my lifetime I would ever say this. I'm going to say it on your podcast, Brian. But I never thought I'd find myself saying one good thing about that man in the White House. But the one thing I will give him credit for is he put a spotlight on just how much bigotry and racism truly exists in this country. I'm going to go focus, it's around the world, but we're going to talk about just the United States of America. There's too much hatred. When I look at the police, and I'm going to talk to you just from my own personal experience now. I've had 22 run-ins with the police in my lifetime, 22. Each time I was doing nothing illegal. I wasn't doing anything wrong. It's simply for the fact I was driving while being black. That was my crime, period. If I was did something illegal, I'd sit here and tell you, well, I was doing this or I was doing that. I did nothing wrong. And so therefore, a person of color, the moment we walk out of our homes, we have to be on alarm. We have to be on alert. Anytime that I see a vehicle today, a police vehicle, that has nothing to do with me at all, but if I just see it in my rearview mirror, if I see it in the distance, my whole personality changes. It's not about fear. It's of concern. It's of, I've got to be aware of where I'm at all times. I got to make sure I keep an eye on them because I'm pretty sure they're keeping an eye on me. But when you start getting pulled over and having Glocks put in your face for no reason whatsoever, being surrounded by 4 or 5 cops with guns drawn while you're picking up your nephew from his job, these things are happening right here in Columbia, Missouri. So, in all due respect, no, I can't even give that man any due respect. I'll just simply put it this way. For a person of color, we have to be concerned at all times, 24/7, even if we're in our own homes. Because now, we're getting killed by the police in our own homes. And yet, nobody's getting prosecuted for it. Nobody goes to jail for it. Nobody. I think about the little girl, the young lady named Breonna Taylor. She's trying to sleep in her own bedroom, and she gets shot 5 or 6 times. Not one police officer that I'm aware of has been prosecuted for that. It's kind of like you and I've had discussions before, and I'll just kind of reiterate some things, at least what goes through my heart and mind. I refer to most of the police who I think fit under the umbrella of Klan police. I think the Klan have gotten rid of their sheets many moons ago. I think they now wear the badges and they carry the guns. I think they sit in the prosecutor's office. I think they sit in the judge's chambers. I darn sure believe they sit in the Senate, House of Representatives. And I have no doubt whatsoever the man who sits in the White House, as he says to them, as far as the Nazis and terrorist groups are concerned, they're all fine people as far as he's concerned. Well, that's insane to me. But here's a question I'll ask the viewers and not so much you, Brian, but the police are so quick to react in a kill mentality against minorities, but they don't have the same kill mentality when it comes to hate homegrown terrorist groups. I read something recently, like, when was the last time you heard of the police shooting pellets at a Nazi group for a gathering, or sick dogs on them, or became in a battle with that particular group? They allow these groups to do whatever they want to do. And I find this country, it's amazing when I look and see and remember what they did to the Black Panther group. But amazing how the Ku Klux Klan group is allowed to remain and to grow and to grow and to grow. Nobody's touched it. The Nazi group, same thing applies. We have so many homegrown terrorist groups in this country right now. And what's being done about that? If it is, it's undercover, and maybe they're doing something that we don't know anything about. All I know is they still exist, and I know they're still growing. And that's a concern for somebody like me. Should be a concern for you too, Brian.
Well, yeah. I mean, free speech, First Amendment right, and those things people usually will end up touting. And
right.
All I'm thinking about is right now is that whether you agree with Al or don't agree with Al, whether what Al just said fires you up on some level that's akin to, attacking your president or makes you uncomfortable, then what I am saying to you is listen to the words coming out of the mouth of this man, Al Terrill, who is a black man in America who has experiences to back up everything that he just talked about. It might trigger rage responses on Facebook.
I'm used to that, Brian. Go ahead.
Controversial, okay, but what I am hoping that people in my network can do is listen to what Al Terrill just said and examine yourself and examine those comments. They might be highly offensive to you, but I'm telling you that I am talking to a man whose heart is pure, who is a treasure to talk to, who's an intelligent man, who has had experiences in his life to back that up. And when we talk about politics, it doesn't take very long before the political element gets into this conversation, whether it's about masks right now or BLM. And the two seem to be interchangeable, which is bizarre to me because they're obviously totally different in many ways. They may have parallels. But I read someplace there was a big rally in Salem against masks this weekend. And somebody said it's very difficult to be a conservative right now and to speak up against some of the things that you see. And I want to say to my conservative friends out there, it should not be harder for you to be a conservative right now. I don't think. I think what needs to happen is if you're a conservative and you're offended by what you're seeing, ask more questions, diversify your friends.
That would be a good start.
More about what's being said. And in the end, it'll do one of two things. It'll either change your opinion or it'll confirm why you believe what you believe. But I think people need to hear some stuff with an open mind and not just trigger the defense mechanism that causes you to want to go wave a rebel flag in defiance of the things that you're seeing.
And see, when you mention the rebel flag, my brain goes immediately to this. The Confederate flag, to me, is a representation of some of the ugliest times in this country's history. It is a reminder of slavery, of lynchings, of murders, of bombings, of burning homes, destroying towns, etc. This is not a history that anybody should want to remember, or at least not celebrate it like so many people want to do. It goes back to the monuments and the statues. The same things apply. James Baldwin once said that change must be faced. And that's where we're at. To me, this is a time and place where we are facing the time to make change. As the great John Lewis once said, if not now, then when? We can't just continuously just keep having dialogue. And you and I talked about this also, Brian. We can continue to march and protest for how long? We have to have a plan in place. We need to be talking about expectations and goals and how we're going to achieve those goals. First thing always comes to mind is voting. You and I kind of touched on that in some of our past conversations. My concern is with all the suppression taking place throughout this country and very few politicians are saying a whole lot about it, they're making it more and more difficult for people to even cast a vote. You can't ask a elderly woman, I don't even say a black woman, it could be an elderly white woman, to travel 75 miles to cast a vote when she has no transportation nor the finances to get from A to B. I think of the Native American Indians, and again, how horribly they've been treated. And yet still, I'm just reading in the last few months how they're not going to be allowed to vote because they don't have a street address. I mean, this country was built on hate. This country was built on greed. This country is built on everybody else's blood. And it's wrong. And it's still, I got a friend, I got to say this before I forget, who said to me once, why do we keep dwelling on the past? And for anybody out there listening, my response to that question is always and will be this. The past is still the present for most of us. It may be the past for you, but it's not for most of us. That's why we're still fighting the same fight. That's why Representative John Lewis went to his grave, still fighting the same fight. And we're just talking about the same and equal rights that everybody else has had for the last 450 years. I don't want to have to walk in a store and have to be worried about being followed around by some 19-year-old kid. I don't want to worry about going down the street and being pulled over for any reason whatsoever because I got some bully of a racist, bigoted cop who doesn't like the way I look. I got pulled over once in Columbia, Missouri, and the officer simply asked me, I asked the officer, I'm sorry, why did he pull me over? His answer, I just wanted to know who was driving this car. That's it. Got back in his car and took off. Not right. But that's what we live with. And I know people may get tired of hearing this, but the only reason you get tired of hearing a black person like me saying the same things over and over and over is because you never experienced it. If you experience it just once in your lifetime, you might be able to hear me a little bit better. But if you've never experienced it at all, you never have to be concerned about it at all, then you need to hear us. You need to hear me. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just asking you to let the seed sink in for you to maybe just think about it. Get past the fact that I'm a black man and just think about the words I'm actually saying to you. I'm not being aggressive. I'm not being mean. I'm not being hateful. I'm actually in some ways pleading for you to at least listen. Nothing more. Just listen to me.
And that's what I'm hoping these conversations will have, which, by the way, when you mention having the conversations and keep them going, there's even some debate on whether that's valuable or not. I ran through the Morgan Freeman stuff. I took a call from a friend of mine who said, "This just let it go. We don't need to keep talking about these things." And when I saw the Morgan Freeman clip, I thought, "What? Morgan Freeman is an extremely highly respected. Denzel Washington also starts to talk about. We're talking about." The real issue is the home life and families and fathers not being at home and those sorts of things. So what should we do, Al? Should we talk about this or should we let it go away like Morgan Freeman says?
Okay, here's what I respect both of those gentlemen tremendously for at least what they do in the acting profession. But some of us have made it in life where we are wealthy enough to live a different type of lifestyle, where we may be accepted in places that somebody like myself would not be allowed to be at. But Denzel and Morgan can probably go to a lot of places that Al Terrill cannot go to. They may even go to a lot of places that Al Terrill wouldn't even want to be at. It's not for me. But the issue they need to understand is there's very few of us who live the life that they live who look like them, period. Most Black Americans, most brown, yellow, you name it, skinned people are not living that kind of life. If Denzel and Morgan were in a neighborhood, let's say a ghetto, all right, they'd have a different perspective on how it feels to live in America. You touched on something a while ago that both these gentlemen had touched on about how I truly believe a lot of what our problems are as far as the black race is concerned does start in the family. But a lot of what's taking place in the black family is based on systemic racism. We didn't cause this. This was brought and delivered to our doorsteps this way. It's hard to get a good education in a poor and rundown school, poor and rundown books. We don't have the same this and the same equipment of that school or this school. We have so much segregation now taking place in our school systems now with the charter schools, the private schools. Segregation, I got to say this. Desegregation rather, did not help the black race at all. It hurt us more than anything, in my opinion. I did not ever go to a segregated school. My brother and my two sisters did. That's when we had a village raising children. In other words, in our neighborhood, we knew our teachers, our principals, our administrators. Everybody knew one another. Then when you start closing black schools and forcing integration into other areas and other different parts of this, let's say a city or a town, you're going away from what you're used to and accustomed to. You're asking these black kids, these minorities, to now adjust, to fit in, to be accepted. And I, as an educator, know for a fact, and I've had teachers tell me this here in Columbia, Missouri, they have a difficult time relating to our black kids. What kind of message that sends somebody like me, a dad whose two sons went through this school system? All this has a lot to do, again, with 450 years of oppression, 450 years of slavery mentality, 450 years of white supremacy. I ask a lot of my white friends, and I have a lot of them, and most of them I love and care about. But I ask them a lot of times, when you're around your friends, let's say in their particular case, they're white friends or white family members, and you have a member in your family who uses the N-word or makes it very clear how he hates people of color, do you speak up? Do you say anything? Because I need people who look like you, Brian, to be anti-racist. And those opportunities, when they present themselves, are you willing to step up? Because a lot of people aren't. Nobody else can hear it. It's just amongst the family members. Well, that's where it starts, and that's where it stays, and that's how it gets carried on and passed on from generation to generation. Nobody on God's earth is born to hate. It's something that has to be taught. We need for people to stop teaching this hate. If I'm going to talk about the black family, I'll talk about that topic all day long. And that is, nobody's born to hate, period. Simple as that. It's passed down from generation to generation.
Talking with Al Terrill, who's a civil rights activist in Columbia, Missouri. And I have so many different thoughts and conversations that Al and I have had that I want to share with people. So I want to touch on just a couple of things. Whether it's Roseburg, Oregon or Columbia, Missouri, I've talked to people of color who say, and where can I go where it's better? And it just feels like, and a lot of I've seen a lot of discussions around the history of Oregon and why Portland is the whitest of the major cities in America. But where you're from also has quite a bit of history there as well. So it's almost like, as much as like one of my goals is to try to make people in my community here in Southern Oregon aware that racism is a thing. Go talk to some people, because that's actually like some debate in our town. It's almost like, does it really exist or not? Or, hey, don't paint everybody in Roseburg, Oregon or Douglas County as a racist here, Brian. And I'm not necessarily doing that. What I'm trying to say is that racism still exists. There's a fear factor for people of color in our community, and as it turns out, in many communities throughout the United States. And you were talking about your area in Columbia, Missouri, and you are living in a very in a place where there are a few people of color, or fewer possibly than other areas around. How would you describe where you live and what it looks like there?
Well, I think blacks make up about a 3 to maybe 5% of the population here in Columbia, Missouri. Columbia, Missouri is a college town. First and foremost, it's going to always be a college town. But one of the things that I notice in this town and in most towns is, if you want to get a job in this town, you're either going to work for one of the local hospitals, or you're going to work at some fast food place. You may get a job working for the city. Working for the state of Missouri is a difficult job to obtain just because of the way it's structured. But I see Columbia as a town that continuously makes it extremely difficult for a person of color to even get a decent paying job to survive off of. When I hear the person in the White House talking about the unemployment rates for minorities, when they start counting those jobs per se, we're talking about fast food places. We're talking about low end paying jobs that you cannot maintain a family on. You have to work 2 and 3 jobs. So then you're taking the parents out of the homes. So the children end up being home alone in a lot of cases. There's not just one layer to this onion that's going to give us all the answers to why things are the way they are, Brian, but these are some bits and pieces of it. But when you know that you're the guy that's going to be the first one that may get laid off from the job. If you've got nothing but white supervisors and white managers, and I used to hear this word a lot, and it used to really rub me the wrong way. Or Al, we're looking for people who can fit in. Well, I took a lot of jobs in my lifetime, and I was never trying to fit in. I was going to take a job because I was qualified for the job, period. I never took a job to make friends. If I made a friend on the job, that was a bonus. That was a plus. And that was great. But I didn't take a job just so I could make another friend. I think people are too quick on jobs to call somebody a friend. They may be your cohort or your associate. You don't know them per se. They don't know your family. They don't know where you live. They don't know what you're about. And between 8 to 5, that's all they know about you. You know what I mean? But Columbia, in retrospect to me, is as racist of a little town as you can imagine. Period. Point blank. It is just as racist in Columbia, Missouri as it is in Fayette, Missouri, or Glasgow, Missouri. Where there are a lot of rural towns in this area. But Columbia is kind of considered in this central part of the state as the big town per se, even though it's not. But to most people around here, it's a big town to them because that's all they're used to. I've seen enough to be able to make this statement. Trying to find a good paying job in the city of Columbia for a person of color, or even for a black woman, or even for a white female, maybe at times, but even more so for people of color, it's almost non-existent unless you are a professor or works at the universities or one of the colleges, etc. Trying to find a decent paying job here is difficult. Period. I mean, when nobody looks like you, Brian, is doing the hiring. Nobody's on the interview panel who looks like you. Nobody who finally makes the decision who gets promoted, who gets terminated. I know a good friend of mine who had more seniority than anybody else at the job or in her department where she worked at, but she's the one who just lost her job. And she had more seniority than the other people who were still there. One lady just started working a couple of months ago, but she's still there. Okay.
And even if it isn't intentionally racist activity by the higher ups,
well, I think it is in Columbia, Missouri. I think it is.
Okay. But the privilege factor, and even the term white privilege tends to trigger some people.
Amen.
The privilege side of that is if I were let go, in the back of my mind, I'm not thinking about it's because of my race.
Right.
I mean, I think I tried to draw a correlation in my ALF experience, which I've talked about quite a bit in some of my other videos. When you realize, let's see, I lost my train of thought on where I was going with that. But the thinking was, I've never had to think about that in my entire life, and that's privilege. And right. For those of us who have never had to worry about that, that's a whole different way. I was drawing a correlation between generational poverty in Douglas County, Oregon, where we have a high rate of drug abuse, a high rate of sexual abuse, generational poverty like crazy here. All these. I tried with one of my African-American friends one time to say, wow, the plight that you're describing sounds a lot like the same people that I have in my backyard who are trying to get up out of all these horrible things that have happened. And I started to believe in my mind for just a short period of time that I could understand what it would be like if I were coming out of a family in that situation. And my African-American friend said, they're still white. They're still white trying to get a job in a white society. They still have an advantage above people of color, just as you described.
Well, I can only speak from my personal experiences in my own life on this particular topic. On the job for 15 years, and one lady who had 2 years of experience, another guy had maybe 12. But when it was time for a layoff, I was the one who was laid off. And it was about a diversity efforts in Kansas City, Missouri, where there is a high population of blacks and minorities. Yet still, white America, and I won't say white America, that's too broad. I'll just simply say state government here exemplifies the bigotry and the racism tenfold. I worked for the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. I had never worked for a government agency before until then. Well, I had to do another job with the Department of Health, but that was different. Worst place I ever worked in my life, and I was a human rights guy there. And my job was to change the culture. It was a good old boy system. My first 6 months on the job was taking meetings with white females on basically how horrible they were being treated by white males. Now, I was with the Division of State Parks and Historic Sites. I was responsible for like 1,100 employees throughout the entire state. We had like 72 state parks and historic sites. You know, a lot of these state parks are in very rural areas. Well, Missouri is a rural state to begin with. So if you can imagine a white female working amongst 15 good old boys and what her life may be like, it was rough. When I first started, they only had 3 people of color working out of these 1,100 employees throughout the entire state of Missouri. Not in Kansas City. We had facilities near Kansas City. We had facilities in St. Louis and around St. Louis. Highly populated Black minority representation. Same thing I can say with Jefferson City and Columbia, where there is enough students, enough people of color to fill jobs if given the opportunity. Well, one thing that I ran into when I first took the job was being told they can't find, and I used to just cringe when I would hear people say this to me. We can't find people of color qualified. Well, you got to look, and then you got to let them through the door, because that didn't happen. So then you've got people who have experience, let's say in the natural resource field, versus the people who have never been allowed to get any experience. So how are they supposed to get in the door, Brian? Because every job is wanting to have more experience, more education. Okay, you can have the education all day, but you were never allowed to get any of the experience. And we changed that. Trust me, we did, but we had to let a lot of people go. I don't know if I ever told you this, but my nickname was Dr. Doom at the Department of Natural Resources. Well, a guy told me this one day, and I kind of smiled. I'm like, well, you know, that's probably one of the better names you call me, at least to my face. And I appreciate it. But it just tells you, this hasn't been that long ago. So this just tells you how far we still have to go in changing things. It's not that hard to create well, I take it back. It is extremely difficult for some to allow us to create a level playing field. Folks don't want it. I mean, if you've had all the power, Brian, all your life, are you going to be a little reluctant to give it up? And we're not asking people to give it up. We're asking them to share it. That's all. There's enough for everybody if you're just willing to share it. Most folks aren't willing to share it.
That's one of the big questions also. So, okay, so I'm sitting here and I'm taking everything Al's saying with an open mind, and I'm triggered on some of the things you're saying. I'm saying if somebody's out here thinking these things, what in the world am I supposed to do, Al? If I'm a conservative, open-minded, good person in Roseburg, Oregon, or Columbia, Missouri, and what we're talking about right here, you just can't wait to find me on the street next time because you're going to give me a piece of your mind about that guy I interviewed on that podcast. Why are you even having then what can I do? What is it that we should be doing? What's the goal?
Well, Brian, you've already started at least. But you've already started at least, and our conversations, you sit on the city council, correct?
Yeah.
And you're trying to make a difference in Roseburg. And that's a start, my friend. Now, if there was like 50 more Brians walking around in Roseburg who look just like you, or doing just what you were doing, you think that would help a little bit? It would help you, I know, but it would help the community as a whole, would it not? I think sometimes, and you know, I know you got something you're going to tell me, but I got to keep going with this or I'll forget it. When I hear people talk about the big sin is I don't see color. Well, don't ever say that to me. That means you don't see me. I mean, I want you to see the proud color that I am. I'm good with that. The issue is how much further do you take it when you see a person of color? Do you automatically have fear in your hearts because I look different than you? Or is that old stigma that's still being taught from generation to generation, anything that's black or dark skin is a bad thing. Black cat's bad. Black Friday, Black Monday, you name it. Everything associated with black in this country has been bad. My brother and I, he's a civil rights guy up in Minneapolis. You know, he's had his hands full lately. And we were talking recently about the Washington Redskins, and they're changing their name finally from the Washington Redskins. They've gotten away with the name. And he said the rumor out there is they may go with the name Warriors. And I'm kind of like, well, that's not a whole lot better than Redskins. I'm going to keep jumping around a little bit. I just called a school here in Missouri called Savannah, Missouri. And I can't remember what their name is off the top of my head. It'll come to me. Oh, they were called the Savages. And I've got to call into the principal. I even emailed this principal, but I can assure you she hasn't returned my calls yet, nor my emails yet. Didn't say I'm going to give up talking, trying to reach out to her. I just want to have a conversation with her about that name. And it's what kind of message does this send to the young people that attend school there? I had a friend of mine said to me that sometimes people see warriors and the word savage differently. I don't know about you, but growing up as a kid, I watched a lot of cowboys and Indians, a lot of movies. The only thing I remember is if you said savage, what's the one thing that came to your mind? Tell me. Native American Indian.
Yeah, Native American.
Period.
Right.
These are just, again, we're talking about peeling back layers here.
Yeah.
And we at least got to be willing to peel back the layers and talk about it. I mean, can you imagine being a Native American Indian in this country today?
And it's important. It's important that Native Americans are included as we talk about people of color as well. I have some. I have strong ties to the Native American community in my own family. I have. Okay. I worked for the Cow Creek Tribe of Umpqua Indians here a few years ago. And I have friends who are paying attention to this conversation that we are having, that I'm having with my friends, and always reminding me, do not forget Native Americans and the same plight that they've had as well. And I have a lot to learn on that front, believe me. And so again, so many different ways the conversation can go here out, but I got to tell you, so there are a couple of spots where I get really squirmy in my seat. And one of them is when I see the statues coming down of Washington and the founding fathers, the heroes of our country, if you will, the Mount Rushmore of America. And so even as I'm trying to be as open-minded as I could be, and I've found an incredibly deep reservoir of incredible people as I've expanded my network a little bit into talking to more and more people of color. I know where my boundaries are. I know where I start to get really uncomfortable. In fact, you send me messenger, you're sending me Facebook stuff, and I watch it and I go, I can't post this. This is too hot for me. I still have the line it seems I can't cross. What would you say? I'm still bothered. And I can't deny anything you just said. I can't deny anything earlier you mentioned about how our country was built, the way it was formed, the expansion of the West, the treaties with our Native American. They never once truly stood for any of the treaties they had the Native American Indian side. Yeah, they were just pieces of paper that I guess they threw away or something. But go ahead, Brian. So I am, in a way, I'm asking, and I'm a little afraid of the answer. But how do I'm open to learning more.
Well, so am I.
I'm not sure. I don't know what else you can ask a person to do,
Well, when it comes to Mount Rushmore, and a lot of minorities, people of color, have been talking about this, of course, and I'm sure people across the country have, that when you look at even the founding fathers, you look at the men who wrote the Constitution, most of these people were all slave owners. Most of these people were, and you're not going to like this word, and none of your fans are either, but I'm going to say it. A lot of these guys were pedophiles. They were raping young black slave girls. Those are facts. I think it's when you put people on such a high pedestal, because all we were taught in public school was how great these men were. We weren't told the truth about them. And to me, and I have a lot of people disagree with me on this, Brian, well, we don't need to go and teach all about the true history of this country. Yeah, you do. It's a must, because maybe it'll deter some of the ugliness that keeps taking place today if people truly knew how this country was built, how it came about, how it was created. It was created by white supremacists. It was by white men. The Constitution wasn't written for people that looked like me. The Star Spangled Banner definitely wasn't written for people that look like me. These men, okay, let me ask you this question, Brian, and then I can put you on the spot. But when you think about men today, who, if they had the reputations of some of these men we're referring to today in our discussion, most of them would probably be locked up in prison of the atrocity they committed against young, let's say I'll say women, period. If they were a 13-year-old white, black, polka dot in between, it doesn't matter. A pedophile is a pedophile. A rapist is a rapist. Well, if you go all the way back then, of course, and everybody's going to say, those were different times. They were different times. But those different times are what we're dealing with in today's time still. There are men who still walk around, I do believe, some of them may be in the Senate, could be in the White House, who still look at women like you and I would never look at them as. You follow me? They have no appreciation or respect for women of any race, of any color. They're just an object to them. When I hear about the Epsteins, the list, the wine guy, I can't think of his name.
Yeah, Harvey Weinstein.
Weinstein. You look Jeffrey Epstein. That's what I was trying to think of. And Weinstein. Even some people who associate closely with the man in the White House. These people have made and have committed probably some horrible, horrible sins. I'll just call them sins. Yet they're fine. They're free to go about their daily lives. Free enough to where you can be a con man of this, a great proportion. And yet you still sit in the White House today. This is white privilege 101. There's not a man of color who could ever do any of the things that some of these men have done and even have a job. We know where we're going. It's either we're going to be 6 feet under or we're going to be incarcerated for the rest of our lives. And I know we don't have time to get into the incarceration issue because predominantly it's free slavery all over again. Privatized institutions. And who's filling those up? Minorities. I know there's some whites in there, don't get me wrong. But the majority are people of color. I kind of got off topic here a little bit, Brian.
Well, that's
I do jump around from topic to topic, right?
That's kind of how all of these conversations go, because one thing trips into the next and away we go. And so I have to ask you, I have two big questions left, and I want to run through some of the statements and comments that are triggering along the line here on Facebook and on YouTube. But okay. I'm gonna come back to the videos and documentaries that you would suggest, because as you went through there, I was thinking of a couple of things. I have to ask you though, before we get into that list, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Hear it a lot. It's a defense mechanism, I think, from a lot of people who are trying to make the point that we all matter, which is ironic because Black Lives Matter is making that point as well. But before I just let you jump into Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, I did see that there is a longer agenda behind the Black Lives Matter movement that includes destruction of the patriarchy, for instance, which then from some people's perspective sounds like you're trying to destroy the nuclear family because it's a patriarchal system. There's a lot of stuff getting thrown around. And what's happening is people see me standing on the street corner holding a sign supporting Black Lives Matter, and then all of a sudden they take that out to mean that I also am inadvertently supporting all these other elements of Black Lives Matter. It's very frustrating because I don't necessarily believe in all those other things. But what I am trying to say is, hey, let's have the conversation and let's look for equality. So I mix all that together and pitch it to you and talk about Black Lives Matter, the significance of that movement, maybe some of the elements of that. Is there a larger agenda behind the BLM movement? And if you want to jump into All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter too, I'm throwing a ton of stuff at y'all at once, but this is a big topic. It's a big thing on my mind.
All right. The first thing that comes to my mind based on what you just said was you didn't hear people screaming all lives matter until you started hearing Black people screaming out Black Lives Matter. And I contradict people who want to throw up all lives matter because undoubtedly that's not true. If all lives matters, then we wouldn't be walking around out there screaming Black Lives Matter. People would have addressed it, and they haven't. Native American Indians, all lives don't matter. We've got children in cages. All lives don't matter. We've got homelessness. All lives don't matter in this country. Until they start addressing all those issues, and they can start saying all lives matter. Of course, everybody's life matters, but what are you doing with that life? Are you able to live in a nice, comfortable area of town where people like me can't even live? Are you willing to step out of your comfort box, your comfort zone? It's scary for some people, but this is what it's going to have to take. It's kind of like with the civil rights movement. It took all walks of life to make the civil rights movement what it was back then. You agree? I mean, it took every type of human being, white, black, and Jews, you name it. Everybody with a good heart, as far as I was concerned, was part of the civil rights movement. We need the same thing today. I think about hatred, and you hear me say this a lot. You hear people throwing this around, hatred and bigotry. It started with white America. We didn't bring the hate. The Indians didn't bring the hate. White America brought the hate. And they're still bringing the hate. I look at my ancestors, my grandfather, my father, who were all uncomfortable with white men. They were somewhat fearful of white men because they knew what they could do to them and get away with it. Wouldn't even be a question about it. That day's over. And it should be over. People of all walks of life should want it to be over. There should come a day in this country where we can all in unison say all of our lives matter. But that's not true right now. If it were true, we wouldn't be screaming out Black Lives Matters. We wouldn't screaming that the police are killing blacks 2 and 3 times more so than whites. I'll go a little bit further with this. People want to always also throw up to me about this, Brian. Well, Al, what about blacks killing blacks? Well, that's horrific too. That's a major problem that we also have to address. And I say we in the black community more so than anybody else. But the reason that we are in this predicament that we're in, and I call it the genocide of the black race, where we've got young blacks killing blacks every day. And it's horrific. Babies being killed, bullets flying, not knowing what their target's going to be. But we got there based on the systemic racism that came about through this country. When you're born with 2 strikes, and I'm as an educator, I've counseled, I've talked with and met with kids, parents whose child was born with 2 strikes against them. 2 strikes. We've got a lot of teenage pregnancies where babies having babies. That's part of it. But when you know you have nothing to live for, say you're a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, Brian, no mom, no dad, but you're at home every night, may not have any electricity on, no food to eat. What is Brian going to do? You're going to go out in the street, and the street's going to raise you. The gangs are going to raise you. because that's as close to a family you've ever seen. It's horrific for the way some of these kids have to live right now. And the bottom line is, as a society, we're all going to have to pay for it in some shape, form, or fashion. And it's not a good debt to pay when people who are losing their lives at 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 and 8 years of age. I mean, I can't even imagine one of my sons coming up missing at that age or being killed at that age. It's a lot to take in, my friend. It's a lot. I'll go back to Black Lives Matter one more time, though. As a black man in this country, and I've been blessed, I got a little bit of an education, but I hope to God I have more common sense than anything. I'll take that over anything from anybody. I don't care if you got a PhD or yada, yada, yada. I'll take your common sense first and foremost. We're missing the main ingredient of people trying to unite and come together as one. That's one thing I do like about the young people who are protesting, they're marching, because there is a coming together, people trying to unite, let's say. But how much further and how long can this marching and protesting continue? Like I said earlier, it's going to run out of steam. We can't afford that to happen. We have a window of opportunity in this country for the first time in a long time, because it's not like the first George Floyd incident in this country. There's too many every day. And I got to touch on this. One of the sad things, and I know I'm skipping around a little bit, Brian. One of the sad things that I've seen in this country is since the George Floyd murder is the Klan police are still murdering innocent black people. We touched on this a little bit, and I don't know if you want to go into this or not, but I'll just bring it up right now. What's on my mind. I don't want to see us defunding the police. I want to see us reform the police. There's facts and numbers out there that will prove that hiring more police isn't the answer. It's hiring good police. That's the big difference in that. I don't want to fear for my sons not coming home because of some bully, racist, bigoted cop decides to use deadly force. Brian, even when we comply and we do everything that they belittle us to do, we still may not come home alive. That, for a black man and a black dad, is frightening. I've taught both my sons this, and again, I'm skipping around. I told both my sons this over their lifetime. Whatever you do, especially when they both lived here in Columbia, Missouri, if you get pulled over by the police, you call me, no matter what time of day it is, because I'm coming to wherever you are. Tell the police officer your dad's on the phone, and he's on his way. My oldest son, AJ, had to do that a couple of times. And I used to tell both my sons, if you're riding around after 10 p.m., guys, you got more than one of you guys in the car, 99.9% of chance you're getting pulled over in Columbia, Missouri. And if you're not doing anything wrong, you're still getting pulled over. That's the life we live.
Yeah, and that's why there's so much stress, and it leads to all kinds of other issues. I would like to note, by the way, that Al did not say every cop is bigoted, racist, and
not at all.
Not every cop, and because I know, the big line is, "Hey, man, we support the police," and believe me, I have a great relationship with our local police officers here. And let me tell you, we had an incident here that raised some eyebrows, and the way our local law enforcement handled it was beyond reproach. It was spectacular. We have the attention of our local law enforcement on this issue because we're a small enough town where we can interact. Now, I say that, and it all takes is one incident, right?
Right.
But I don't want it to get confused that Brian Prawitz interviewed this guy and he said about the bigoted, racist cops. He did not say all.
Let me clarify something. There are bad people in every profession. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, police, prosecutors, judges, politicians. Let me make sure I throw that in there. In all professions. I know there are some good police out there. I haven't seen very many of them personally. I know they do exist. I would never paint a broad brush over all police when I say or refer to the Klan police, because I do believe that there are the Klan police that do exist. I believe there is a blue gang, as I refer to them as, that are simply about being police officers to do exactly what they've been doing. And that is abusing their power. Their hatred is taken out on people who look different than them. Their upbringing, what they've been taught, is taken out on people who look different than them. There has to be some good cops in the world, or most of my people wouldn't even be here if that were the case. I'm just saying to you, there's bad in all professions. That's it.
Yeah.
And I would not say there's bad. All teachers are bad. Now that would be ridiculous.
Right.
All doctors are bad. That would be ridiculous.
Right.
But I am saying there are some bad cops.
Al, give me a couple of videos or documentaries that you would suggest.
Well, let's see here. There's one. What's the name of it? It's called The 13th, and it goes into like chronicle order of this country and racism. It's called The 13th. That's the one that's out there on Netflix right now. I would hope everybody would take time to watch it. I'm trying to think of the one that's one of my old favorites, and that's the movie called Rosebud. If you haven't ever watched it, people should watch the movie called Rosebud, because it's a true factual movie, again, about a black town surviving and doing great. Again, a white female lied about a black man supposedly did something, a black boy, which was a lie. They ended up burning the town down, killing almost everybody they could see. Lynchings took place, etc. Then you think about the history in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It doesn't take a lot to get on the internet and pull that up and read all you want to read. But I'll go one step further. What I would ask for people to do who are listening to this is sit down with people who are different, because you're going to find out we're more similar than we're different. We just like focusing on our differences too much. Try focusing on our similarities. I want the same thing that Joe down the street has, who might be white, but I want to be able to take care of my sons, have a decent roof over my head, live a decent life, and not in fear of any man or any person. That's what most people want. Simple as that. It's just hard to achieve in a country that has such history of systemic racism. You just can't wash this away. And I need people to stop saying we need to stop living in the past. We're the ones who are trying not to live in the past. We're needing you guys to stop living in the past and change. If not now, then when?
I appreciate everything you've said there. And just listening, having the conversation, being open to the conversation, I think is a step for sure. Let's run through a few of the comments that are over here. So obviously this jumps into politics very quickly, and I'm just going to stay bold and throw some things out here. So Tim says, Trump has twisted the conservative base to mean racist. You know, I'm a conservative. I may have shifted. If you ask some of my friends, I'm the most liberal conservative they've ever met. But the thing about that statement would be, if you are a Trump supporter and you feel like the conservative base is being called racist, in my opinion, what I would try to do is to prove everybody wrong. Like, what is so hard about being a Trump supporter and having these conversations in order to prove that there is no racism involved here? I just find I would love more conservative people to open their minds and have these kinds of conversations. And maybe it's not possible. I don't know.
Well, my response to that is, and I've said this to a lot of folks, so I gotta be me, Brian. And that is, my belief is this. And I have a good childhood friend, and she knows who she is. And I ended up blocking her recently on Facebook because of her post, and I'm sure she made it pretty clear she didn't really care about a lot of my posts. And I told her I'm trying to save our friendship, and I am. because I love her. I care about her tremendously. I just don't want our posts and our differences on Facebook to create a problem with our friendship. That's it. And I'll call her here soon, and we'll have a good conversation on the phone. She's a tough little woman, so she'll be okay. What I'm going at with this is this. If you support the man in the White House, I call him 45 minus 1, just to be clear. My belief is if you support a man who's shown nothing but racism, division, hatred, does that make you similar to those beliefs? Because those are his beliefs. That's what he's shown. This man has divided this country more than any president in our history, as far as I'm concerned. Would you agree or disagree? You think he's pulled the country together, Brian? I don't think so.
No.
In other words, it's like this to me, Brian. And she's never said she's a Trump supporter, not in words, but in her posts, she definitely is. So we've had a conversation where I'm just going to say she might be a Trump supporter. It doesn't change how I feel about her, but it changes how I may see her in the light of I have a hard time understanding anybody who's brought up on morals and values and calls themselves a Christian and can support a man who conducts himself in a manner that he does. Simple as that.
Another comment here from Allison. We are all part of a racist system. This is why we need to be anti-racist and be brave enough to speak up when we see it. We also need to be able to see it in ourselves. So that comment right there would have thrown me off so hard a few years ago. I'd have been denying everything about it. We don't live in a racist
system. It's true, Brian. It's true.
That's what I've learned in the last few years, though. And to be willing to see it in ourselves, I think is very important too. That's hard. That takes a lot of work.
Well, remember I said to you earlier, though, that people of color, Native Americans, we didn't bring the hate to the table. We didn't bring the bigotry to the table. We didn't bring the slavery to the table. This was white America. This is what they brought to the table. This is what they still bring in 2020 to the table. What's her name? Allison? Thank you very much. I agree with everything you said, dear.
You know what's really hard? And I can hear it right now, and I can hear it in my ears right now.
What?
I'm saying, I didn't bring those things.
Did your ancestors bring them? Did your grandfather, your great-grandfather?
If they did, what am I supposed to do about that?
Change. Change. Be willing to change. I mean, you know what? I wish I could be a bug on the wall at people's get-togethers. All right, I gotta say this, Brian. I was at a little get-together recently, the only person of color, and a gift was exchanged. And when the little girl opened up the gift, it's one of my students, and it was a pedicure thing for little girls. And I heard some man rumble in the background. What are you trying to do? Make her Asian? And of course, being me, I'm glad I had a mask on because they couldn't see how my facial expression went from happy to not happy. And I left about 5 minutes after that was said. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. I mean, if you don't look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself this, are you part of the solution? Are you part of the problem? Do you want things to remain the same? The ugliness, the wickedness, the evilness that still takes place in this country every single day? Or do you want to change it? Because that same evil, ugly, and wickedness is going to come back on everybody eventually. Not just some, not just people of color. It's going to affect us all. It's already affecting us all. You know?
Well, people are adding all kinds of comments down the side with ideas about different shows to watch, books to read, documentaries, and all. I just finished The Water Dancer by Natasi Coates, who wrote Between the World and Me. So I got to read that too. And I've got a whole stack of books from friends of mine that they want me to read. And
you got to start a new library, Brian?
I have a new library I've started, and it's hard because some of it, I mean, I still have to really work through a lot of the things that are out there.
But Brian, let me say this to you. But you're trying. If people would just be willing to try, we can't get some people to even try. We can't get people to want to even sit down and have the dialogue, because they already got either a closed heart or a closed mind to all this. That, hey, my world is fine. Good luck with you and yours. You know what I mean? That type of mentality.
If you can say your world is fine, that's the definition of privilege, is it not?
It is all about privilege.
And when people, I would fight that. You see the stuff online all over the myth of white privilege, and people want to deny it, and it's bad. I mean, there is not a single point out there right now that has 100% agreement, because you can always find the other argument on YouTube someplace, and it's compelling as heck, and you watch it and you're just like, wow, interesting stuff. But
everybody's got an opinion, Brian. Everybody's got one.
I found this out as I was discussing homelessness. Homelessness, at least in our town, wasn't really a problem until homeless people wound up defecating and sleeping on the stoops of the business owners in downtown Roseburg.
Then became an issue.
And it finally became their issue for them. Yeah. And then I'm thinking, if you don't have to deal with bipolar or homelessness or being addicted or possibly have some kind of issue, and you don't know anything about that, and you know nothing about what it's like to be homeless or a person of color, you just defined exactly what privilege is about.
Well,
it's privilege until you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I'll take it a little bit further. It's not just people of color being homeless. Anybody homeless. It is a horrific state to be in. And what do we do about it in this country? Other than we try to push them to this part of the town or this part of the town, etc. In Columbia, Missouri, there was a period of time where they had set a certain part of the land for just homeless people to go and shelter at when the COVID was hitting for the first big time around, like in March, April, whatever. Well, they were forced off this piece of land, not bothering anybody, because the surrounding people who lived in homes didn't appreciate them being on the land. We're no longer I don't know if we've ever been truly a compassionate, understanding, forgiving, accepting society in this country. I don't know if we've ever been. I think about it, and I'm trying to figure out what time and place in America can we say America was A, B, C, D, and E ever. I'm waiting. If somebody's got the answer out there, let me and Brian know.
Well, Al, we've gone quite a bit longer than I know either of us had this on.
You know I'm wrong.
Is that we say, hey, give me a call. I got 15 minutes. And an hour later, we're still rapping and going and talking and thinking and all that, trying to solve all the problems. And I just want to, once again, I want to encourage people. First of all, thanks for watching this. But if there are some things in here that have really fired you up. I mean, we literally have stepped on quite a few toes. I know
that's kind of what I do, Brian.
You're a little more used to it, I think, maybe than I am.
You're gonna get there, my friend. You're gonna get there.
I really don't want to only always hear from people who agree with all of these things. I really, really want to talk to people who look like me in my community, who want to argue with me on these points, who want to be mad at me for throwing Trump under the bus during this interview because I let Al talk and I didn't challenge him.
I didn't throw him under the bus, but I sure would like to.
But he was nice, actually, for some of the things that I've heard. But here's the thing. Please, I beg you, if there's only one thing that you take away from this, is if you've watched this to this point, you've heard everything that's been said, would you just please take an opportunity to hear what Al is saying and what people of color is saying and examine where you're coming from on this? And if you are a person of faith, please look at this from a point of view of love. I mean, that to me, that's the thing that drives most of this for me is like, I want to be able to love on a level that is incomprehensible and unconditional and permanent and amazing. And that's the motivation for me on a lot of these things. And so that's what's led me to open my mind. And it seems like a lot of the same people who think the way I do, politically, philosophically, spiritually, should be able to do the same thing. And I think we could probably get a long way if we could all admit.
Let me say this. I know we got to go. And this is for folks. I don't think I've mentioned this today. I have brothers who are white, who I love as my brothers. I have white women who are my sisters, who I love as my sisters. Race has nothing to do with us. But I want other people like you, Brian, that are at least willing to have a conversation with a guy like me. That's a major for me. And I hope other people out here can pick up that. I think you and I can sit and have a conversation about anything and everything. We'd be just fine about it. And I'm trying to convey this to other people as well. No matter when you see this man, this Al Terrill, we can have that conversation. As long as we keep it respectful, we can have any kind of conversation that you want. Period. Brian, again, last thing, I'm stopping myself. I look at all the people who claim to be Christians in this world, and this bothers me. If there were that many Christians in this world, truly God-fearing, God-loving people, this world would not be in this state. Somebody's not being honest with their faith. My God would not want us to be this way toward one another. We're his children, all made in his image. And somewhere that's gotten lost. I'll stop.
Okay, Al. Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody watching. We're going to continue these conversations every week until we have a catalog of a whole bunch of people in our communities that are willing to talk about these big issues and to just be open and honest about them. What I love is some intelligent dialogue pushed back out into what seems to be a place where it's really hard to find really good conversations. And I don't think in words and in messages back and forth on Facebook, this is the place to have that conversation. It needs to be more of a face-to-face deal.
Amen. I agree.
Whether you have a fancy computer system that you can interview people around the country, or you just invite a person of color to lunch and go ask them what it's like to live in your community as a person of color, I encourage you to do much the same as Al and I have done here today. Have a conversation. You don't have to agree on every single thing, but you can come to the end of the conversation and still have love and respect. And I think that's what moves the world forward, just one person at a time.
Amen. I agree completely.
Cool. All right. Well, this is proof that this is proof right here of this shirt. Diversify your knowledge, diversify your friends.
Well, I kind of like my shirt too now, Brian. Hold on a second, man.
Smarter.
You can get my shirt in there?
Yeah, you can maybe stand up a little bit. There you go. There you go.
I don't know if you can get it or not.
Now it's getting crazy. Wow. Although your message is extremely important, obviously.
I didn't wear my hat today, okay? I didn't put my hat on.
Oh, you got a hat too?
It had masks.
Show here with Al. Al Terrill. Well, we'll put links to various things in the show notes on YouTube. Share this with your friends if you want to. We had a pretty nice audience watching today. It'll only grow. And Al, much love to you, and stay safe there in Columbia, and keep doing what you're doing, my friend.
All right, Brian. Love to you as well, man. Much love, man.
All right.
All right. Take care.